Marry me, Miss Whitlock. 3 days from now you'll either be my wife, or you'll have nothing left to call your own." The words hit Clara like a slap across the face. She didn't know this man. She didn't trust him. And yet, standing in the shadow of her dying father's debt with the land she'd bled for slipping through her fingers, she realized with cold, terrible clarity that she had no other choice. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel. Drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Clara Whitlock had always believed that hard work was enough. She believed it when she was 12 years old, hauling water buckets before sunrise because her mother's hands had gone stiff with arthritis. She believed it when she was 16, keeping the farm's account books by lamplight while her father plowed until his back gave out. She believed it at 23, standing in the dusty yard of the only home she'd ever known, watching the sheriff nail a notice to the gatepost, like it was nothing. Like her family's entire life was just a piece of paper with numbers on it. Notice of debt collection. 3 days to settle. Or forfeit. She read it twice. Then she pulled it off the post and walked inside. Her father, Edmund Whitlock, was lying in the back bedroom. He'd been there for 6 weeks. The doctor from Cotter Creek said it was his heart worn thin from decades of worry and labor. He wasn't dying fast. He was dying slow, the way a candle burns down to nothing when no one's watching. Clara set the notice on the table beside his bed. Edmund looked at it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he turned his face toward the wall. "How much?" he finally asked. $412, Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. She'd made a private decision years ago that she would not let her father see her fall apart. That was her job, to be the steady one. "And 40 cents. Edmund closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, Clara." "Don't." She pulled the quilt up higher over his chest. "Just rest." But as she walked back to the kitchen, Clara's composure cracked the moment she was out of his sight. She pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed through her nose, slow and deliberate, the way you breathe when you're trying not to scream. $412. She had 27. The town of Cotter Creek was the kind of place where everybody knew your business, and half of them were glad when it went bad. Clara walked the main street that afternoon with her chin up and her eyes forward the way her mother had taught her. You look down, people think you're ashamed. You look up, people at least have to pretend to respect you. She went to the bank first. Mr. Aldous Fitch sat behind his oak desk, like a man who had never once in his life felt uncertain about anything. He was the kind of man who wore suspenders, even on Sundays, who kept his fingernails clean, while everyone else's were black with soil. "Miss Whitlock." He didn't stand. "I heard about your father." "Then you know why I'm here," Clara said. She sat down without being invited. "I'm asking for an extension on the loan. 2 months, maybe 3. The spring harvest. Won't cover it." Fitch folded his hands on the desk. "I've seen your family's yield records, Miss Whitlock. 3 bad seasons in a row. The bank can't extend credit on a property that isn't producing." "1 bad season," Clara corrected. "Last year was only bad because of the early frost, and the year before." "Miss Whitlock." His voice was flat. Final. "The answer is no." Clara stood. She didn't argue further. She could see in his eyes that arguing would accomplish nothing except humiliate her. And she couldn't afford to be humiliated today. She needed to stay sharp. She went to the general store next. She spoke to the Halverson brothers who owned the mill outside town. Could she take on contract work? They said they'd think about it. She knew they wouldn't. She went to Mrs. Calloway, who ran the boarding house. Could she take in washing? Mrs. Calloway was kind about it, at least. She said she was sorry, she truly was, but she was barely making ends meet herself. By the time the sun was low and orange over the rooftops, Clara had been turned down 6 times. She stood at the edge of the main street, her boots dusty, her pride running thin, and she did the arithmetic again in her head, the way she always did when she was frightened, like numbers could be a rope to hold on to. $27. 412 needed. 3 days. There is no solution. Some cold, honest part of her said, "There is no solution, and you know it." She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, his boots. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of step that doesn't apologize for taking up space. She turned, and there he was, a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with a week's worth of dark beard and a canvas coat that had seen better decades. He was tying a horse to the hitching post outside Connolly's Hardware, a big gray mountain horse, the kind that worked for a living. Clara had seen him once or twice before, in the way you see a stranger in a small town. You notice them without registering them the way you notice weather. She knew the town talked about him. Rowan Hale, they said. Lives up in the mountains. Comes down for supplies. Keeps to himself. Some said he was strange. Some said he was broke. Most said both. She was about to turn away when he looked up. His eyes were dark, direct, and completely unreadable. "Miss Whitlock," he said. She blinked. "You know my name." "Small town." He looped the reins through the post and turned to face her fully. "Word travels." "What word?" she asked carefully. He looked at her for a moment, not rudely, but with an assessing quality that made her want to stand straighter, which annoyed her. "That you've been going door to door today, looking for money you're not going to find." Clara felt heat rise in her face. "That's my business." "It might be mine too," he said. "If you're willing to hear a proposal." She almost walked away. Every instinct built from 23 years of prairie survival told her a man you don't know with a proposal you didn't ask for is a man who wants something. But she thought about the notice, about the 40 cents. "Talk," she said. Rowan Hale was not a man who wasted words. He said it plainly, standing right there on the street, with the evening dust blowing around their boots. He needed a wife. Not for romance, he was clear about that quick enough that it stung slightly, though Clara told herself it didn't. He needed someone to manage the household side of his operation while he focused on the business. Someone capable, someone practical, someone who wasn't going to faint at the sight of hard work. In exchange, he would settle her father's debt, all of it, before the deadline. Clara stared at him for a long moment. The street was quiet around them. A dog barked somewhere. A child ran past. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough." "What does that mean?" "It means I've watched you go to 6 different people today and get turned down 6 times, he said, "and you never once let your face show it until you thought no one was looking." He paused. "I was looking." Clara didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away. "What kind of operation?" she asked. "Timber, up in the Kettle Range." "Timber." She crossed her arms. "And you need a wife because running a household and running a business at the same time is one person's work too much," he said simply. "I've managed it alone for 3 years, and I'm losing ground." "I shouldn't be losing. I need someone organized, someone who can keep records, manage accounts, deal with the men when I can't." "That sounds like a business manager," Clara said. "Not a wife." "A business manager I'd have to pay in cash I don't have to spare," Rowan said. "A wife is a different arrangement." "A wife," Clara repeated slowly, "that you'd pay for with $412. "And 40 cents, he said, and there was something in his tone, not quite humor, but close to it, that caught her off guard. She looked at him carefully. His coat was patched at the elbow. His hat had a crease that suggested it had been dropped and retrieved from the ground more than once. Nothing about him said money. Nothing about him said security. And yet... "I need to think about it," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning," he said. "I ride out at first light." He untied his horse and looked at her over the animal's neck. "I'll be at the stable before dawn, Miss Whitlock. The answer is up to you." He left. Clara stood in the street watching the shape of him disappear down the block, and she thought, "He is either the answer to everything or the biggest mistake I will ever make." She walked home. She didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a lamp burning low, and she made a list. She always made lists when she couldn't think straight, columns of for and against, like the account books she kept for the farm. It was what she had, instead of a confidant, instead of a mother who was still living, instead of a sister or a friend close enough to tell the truth to. Against. She didn't know him. The marriage would be a legal contract, not a love match. The mountains were far from everything familiar. He could be dangerous. He could be lying. He could be, for the debt would be gone. Her father could die without that weight on his chest. The farm technically would be freed, even if she was the one leaving it. She would have work that used her mind, not just her back. She stared at the 2 columns for a long time. Then she blew out the lamp and went to sit beside her father's bed. Edmund was awake or half awake, the soft, drifting kind of consciousness that illness brought, where the line between sleep and waking blurred. He reached for her hand in the dark. "Clara," he murmured. "I'm here, Papa." "You shouldn't." He stopped, breathed. "You shouldn't have to carry all this." "I want to." "No." His fingers tightened on hers, weaker than they used to be, but still her father's hands. The hands that had taught her to hold a shovel, to read a contract, to shake hands like she meant it. "You want to take care of everyone else. That's different. You never stop to ask what you want for yourself." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What if I told you," she said carefully, "that I might have found a solution to the debt?" Her father was quiet too. Then, "What kind of solution?" "A man has offered to settle it. In exchange for marriage." The silence that followed was long enough that she thought he might have drifted back to sleep. But then Edmund said very quietly, "Do you trust him?" Clara thought about those dark, direct eyes, the weight of his boots on the boardwalk, the fact that he had been watching not in a predatory way, but in the careful way of someone who paid attention, who assessed, who took things seriously. "I don't know him well enough to trust him," she said honestly. "But I don't know him well enough not to either." Edmund exhaled slowly. "Your mother would have said," he murmured, "that there are moments when you don't choose the safe path. You choose the brave one, and pray they're the same road." Clara held his hand until his breathing steadied back into sleep. Then she went to her room, packed a single bag in the dark, and lay down on top of her quilt, with her eyes open, until the sky began to gray at the edges. She was at the stable before Rowan Hale. He came around the corner leading his gray horse, and he stopped when he saw her standing there with her bag at her feet and her chin at that angle she didn't know was so recognizable, the "I've made a decision and I will not be moved" angle that would in time become one of the things he knew best about her. He looked at her. He looked at the bag. He didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted, the faintest loosening, the way a man looks when something he wasn't sure he'd get turns out to be within reach after all. "Miss Whitlock," he said. "There will be conditions," she said immediately. He waited. "The debt is settled before we leave this town. I see the bank receipt with my own eyes." She held up one finger. "My father is told and he agrees. I won't go without his blessing, even if—" Her voice caught slightly and she pushed through it. "Even if he doesn't have much time left to give it." Second finger. "Whatever arrangement we have, it is honest. I won't be lied to about what I'm walking into. Not about the work, not about the land, not about you." Rowan studied her face. Then he nodded once, the kind of nod that's a promise, not a pleasantry. "Agreed," he said. "All three." "Then we have a deal," Clara said. She picked up her bag. And Rowan Hale, the mountain man, everyone in Cotter Creek had written off as poor, as strange as nothing, turned and led his horse toward the bank, and Clara Whitlock followed him into the biggest gamble of her life. She did not look back at the street she'd walked her whole life. She looked forward, and somewhere deep in the part of her that kept accounts, kept records, kept the careful ledger of what was true and what was wishful, something she hadn't felt in years, quietly opened like a window. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the shape of it. The space where hope might grow, given time and the right kind of tending. She didn't know yet what waited for her in those mountains. She didn't know about the gates, the buildings, the scale of what Rowan Hale had built and kept hidden from a world that had already decided who he was. All she knew in that first pale morning was that she had chosen brave over safe. and she had never, not once in 23 years, chosen wrong. The bank receipt was real. Clara held it in both hands outside Fitch's office while Rowan waited on the steps behind her, and she read every line twice, the way she read everything twice, the way her father had taught her, because the first time you read something, you see what you want to see, and the second time, you see what's actually there. $412.40, paid in full. Whitlock farm debt settled. She folded it carefully and put it inside her coat against her chest where she could feel it. Satisfied? Rowan asked. Yes, she said. Just that. Nothing more. She thought he might say something else. People usually filled silences she'd noticed when they were uncomfortable or wanted to be liked. Rowan didn't. He just turned and walked toward the stable, and Clara followed. And that was the beginning of what she would later understand was one of his defining qualities. He never said more than he meant, and he never meant less than he said. They went to her father first as agreed. Edmund Whitlock looked at Rowan Hale for a long time from his pillow, the assessing look of a man who had hired and fired and been deceived and trusted and learned across 64 years of living to tell the difference between a man who was performing and a man who simply was. "You'll take care of her," Edmund said. It wasn't a question. "She'll take care of herself," Rowan said. "I'll make sure she has what she needs to do it." Clara watched her father's face. Something in it eased, not completely, not the way it would have eased if she were staying, if she were safe in the next room, but genuinely in the way of a man who has been holding a door shut by himself for too long and has finally found someone else to help hold it. "Then go," Edmund said. He looked at Clara. "Go, sweetheart. Don't you look back." She kissed his forehead. She held his hand for 30 seconds exactly she counted, because she knew if she didn't count, she would never let go. Then she walked out the door, and she didn't look back because he'd told her not to, and she had never once in her life disobeyed her father when it truly mattered. They were married that afternoon by Pastor Griggs, who asked no questions, which Clara appreciated. 2 witnesses from the street, a bootmaker named Harlan and a woman Clara barely knew named Deb Sutter, signed the paper. The whole thing took 11 minutes. Clara kept her eyes on the pastor's collar and thought about inventory, about what she'd packed about, whether she'd remembered the small account book she kept in the tin box under her bed. She had remembered it. Good. Afterwards, outside the church, Rowan handed her up onto a second horse he'd arranged, a sturdy brown mare, calm and sure-footed, and they rode north out of Cotter Creek into the long country that stretched between the valley and the Kettle Range. Clara rode beside him and said nothing for the first hour. Rowan said nothing either. Somewhere around the second hour, Clara broke first, not because she was nervous, but because she was practical, and practical people don't waste time when there's information to be gathered. "How many men do you employ?" she asked. Rowan glanced at her sideways. 14 full-time, more in the cutting season. "And who manages the accounts currently?" "I do." "Yourself?" "Along with the operation." "Yes." She absorbed that. "How far behind are you?" A pause, longer than she expected. "The contracts are current," he said. "The record-keeping is not." "How far behind?" 18 months. Clara stared at him. 18 months of unreconciled accounts? "I said the contracts are current," he repeated with a slight edge that told her this was a sore point. "The money is coming in. Where it goes after that is less organized." "You're losing money," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was arithmetic. "Probably," he said, and the honesty of that one word, the quiet, undefended admission of it, surprised her. Most men she knew would have argued, would have defended. Rowan Hale just said probably like a man who was already tired of a problem and ready for someone else to help him solve it. "All right," she said. "I'll need everything. Every ledger, every contract, every receipt you have. Even the ones you think don't matter." "Fine. And I'll need a proper desk. There's one in the house. A good one with a lamp." Something crossed his face that she couldn't read yet. She would learn over time that it was the expression he made when something almost made him smile, but he'd gotten out of the habit. "Yes, Miss Whitlock," he said. A good one, with a lamp. Clara, she corrected. If we're married, use my name. He looked at her. Clara, he said. And something about the way he said it, carefully like a word he was weighing, made her look straight ahead at the road and say nothing else for a while. By the time they stopped to rest the horses at midday, Clara had extracted the following information through steady, methodical questioning. 14 employees, 3 main cutting crews, 2 sawyers, who also handled some of the milling. A foreman named Pete Garza, who had been with Rowan for 2 years. A supply contract with a railroad company 3 counties east that was the primary source of income, and a secondary contract newer, shakier. She could tell from the slight tension in Rowan's voice with a company called Mercer Timber that had been purchasing excess lumber at below-market rates. Below market, Clara repeated. By how much? 12%. Why did you agree to that? Cash flow, Rowan said. 6 months ago, there was a gap between the railroad payments. Mercer offered to fill it. And now the gap is closed and Mercer is still buying at 12 below, and they're not eager to renegotiate. Clara set down the piece of dried bread she'd been eating and looked at him directly. They're locking you in. They're trying to. Do you have the original contract? Somewhere. Rowan. She said his name the same careful way he'd said hers. When I ask, do you have a document, somewhere, is not an answer. He met her eyes. There was a flicker of something not irritation exactly. More like the look of a man who has spent years being competent at everything that required physical strength and patience, and has just encountered the specific humbling experience of someone pointing out the one thing he's been avoiding. It's in the house, he said. In a box. What kind of box? A wooden one. With other documents. Yes. How many other documents? The pause was so long that Clara had time to finish her bread. A lot, Rowan finally said. She nodded slowly. All right, she said. We'll deal with it. You're not? He stopped. What? Most people would argue, he said. Tell me I should have organized it years ago. Tell me how bad it is. I already know how bad it is, Clara said. Telling you won't fix it. Fixing it will fix it. She stood up and brushed off her coat. Let's keep moving. They rode for another 4 hours before the country began to change. She could feel it more than see it. A shift in the air. A shift in how the horses moved. More deliberate, more muscled effort in each stride. The road narrowed. The wind picked up. And then they came around a long curve in the trail, and Clara heard it before anything else. Voices. Male voices, the clang of tools, the rhythmic percussion of serious work. A man appeared ahead on the trail, mid-40s, stocky with a foreman's walk. The kind of man who moved like he owned the ground he stood on, without actually owning anything. Garza, Rowan said, pulling up. Pete Garza looked at Clara. He didn't hide his surprise. He looked at Rowan. He looked back at Clara. Then he looked at the single bag tied to her saddle. This is Clara, Rowan said. My wife. The silence that followed was brief, but very full. Wife, Pete Garza repeated. Yes. Garza looked at Clara with an expression she recognized. Not hostility. Not quite, but the particular wariness of a man who has an established order and has just been informed it's about to change. He was calculating. Who is she? What does she want? How much is she going to interfere? Clara had dealt with that look her entire adult life. She met it the same way she always did, directly, pleasantly, without any sign that she'd noticed it at all. Mr. Garza, she said. I understand you've been managing the crews. I'd like to sit down with you sometime in the next day or two and understand how the operation runs. Not to interfere, I just work better when I understand the whole picture. Garza blinked. He'd clearly expected either timidity or authority. He'd gotten neither. He'd gotten competence, which was somehow harder to argue with. Sure, he said after a moment. Sure, that'd be fine. Good. She smiled, brief and businesslike. We'll find a time. She rode on, and she heard Garza say quietly to Rowan behind her, Where'd you find her? And Rowan's voice, equally quiet. She found herself. I just asked. Clara filed that away too. She smelled wood smoke and heard the distant sound of a creak before Rowan said, "We're close now." And then they came through a stand of trees and Clara saw the first building, not the house, not yet, but one of the outbuildings. A long structure that clearly served as storage built solid and low to the ground, with the kind of careful construction that said this was built to last, not to impress. Then another building beside it. Then what looked like a bunkhouse. Then a covered workspace where two men were working with wood and tools, and they looked up when the horses came through, and they stared at Clara with the same suppressed shock as Garza had 14 men, who had probably assumed their employer was a bachelor for life, confronted with evidence to the contrary. "Is it always this quiet when you come home?" Clara asked quietly. "Yes," Rowan said. "It won't be any more," she said. He looked at her. "Is that a warning?" "It's a fact," she said. "Organized operations make noise. Records being kept make noise. People knowing what they're supposed to do and actually doing it, that all makes noise." She paused. "Good noise, but noise." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I can live with that." And then she saw the house. She had expected modest. She had prepared herself for modest, a frontier house, maybe better than average, with a good roof and a solid floor, which would have been plenty, which would have been more than fine. What she had not prepared for was the sheer scale of it. It wasn't a frontier house. It was, she didn't have a word for it immediately, and Clara Whitlock always had words. That was one of the things that made her her. She had to stop and simply look and let her brain catch up with her eyes. It was built into this mountain like it had always been there. Multiple wings. A wide covered porch that wrapped the entire front. Windows. Real glass windows, more of them than she could quickly count, catching the late afternoon light. Chimneys at each end. A second floor. A second floor with what appeared to be a railed gallery running the length of it. She became aware that she had stopped her horse. She became aware that Rowan had stopped beside her and was watching her face. "You said you had a house," she said. "I do," he said. "You said—" She stopped. She thought back carefully through every conversation they'd had from Cotter Creek to this moment. He had never, she realized, actually described it. She had assumed. She had pictured a frontier house because he looked like a frontier man, patched coat-worn hat, the manner of someone who didn't care about appearance. She had assumed wrong. "You let me think," she started. "I didn't say anything about the house," Rowan said carefully. "You didn't ask." She pressed her lips together. He was right. She hadn't asked. In all her methodical questioning about employees and contracts and ledger books, she had not once asked, "What does your house look like? Why?" She said, and her voice was very controlled, very even. "Does a man who lives like this?" She gestured at him. "The coat, the hat, the everything, look like that." Rowan looked down at himself, then back at her. And this time it did happen, not almost, but actually he smiled. It was brief and it was crooked, and it changed his face entirely, like light coming through a shutter that's been closed for a long time. "I work," he said simply. "You don't work in your good clothes." Clara stared at him. She thought about the bank receipt, the 14 workers, the railroad contract, the Mercer situation, everything she'd been mentally calculating for hours, all the numbers and problems she'd been quietly organizing in the back of her mind, and she recalculated all of it against this new information. This was not a struggling man who needed a wife to manage a modest household. This was something else entirely. "Rowan," she said. "Yes. How large is this operation precisely?" "Not approximately. Precisely." He looked at her for a moment. She could see him deciding something, whether to tell her fully, whether the moment was right, whether she was ready. She held his gaze and let him see that she was. "Come inside," he said. "I'll show you the books." He dismounted and handed his reins to a young man who had appeared seemingly from nowhere to take the horses, and he walked toward the house, and Clara dismounted. Herself declined the young man's offer to take her bag and followed. She walked through the front door of Rowan Hale's house, carrying her single bag and the folded bank receipt, and 18 months of someone else's tangled financial history waiting to be solved. And she thought my father was right. There are moments when brave and safe turn out to be the same road. Then Rowan opened the door to the study, and Clara saw the desk. The good desk, solid oak with a lamp already lit against the fading afternoon, and beside it, stacked nearly to her shoulder, a tower of ledgers and loose papers and contracts stuffed into folders and envelopes, and yes, a wooden box exactly as described, overflowing with documents that had not been touched in what looked like considerably more than 18 months. She set her bag down. She took off her coat. She rolled up her sleeves. "You'll need coffee," Rowan said from the doorway. "I'll need a lot of it," she said. She pulled the nearest ledger from the stack, opened it, read the first page, and then she looked up at him, and her expression said everything she didn't say aloud. "This is worse than you told me, and I'm going to fix it anyway, and don't you dare apologize because we don't have time for that." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face did that thing again, the shuttered window, the held-back light. "I'll get the coffee," he said quietly. He left. Clara turned back to the ledger. Outside, the mountain wind pressed against the glass. Inside, the lamp burned steady and warm. And Clara Whitlock. Clara Hale, technically though, that would take some getting used to, opened the first page of a life she hadn't planned and started to read. She did not stop until well past midnight. And when she finally sat back, her neck aching, her eyes burning, 3 ledgers fully reviewed, and a page of her own notes filled front and back, she realized something she hadn't expected. It wasn't a disaster. It was salvageable. More than salvageable. Beneath the chaos of 18 months of unorganized records, there was a genuine operation here. Real contracts, real income, real assets. Someone had built something substantial, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone in Cotter Creek knowing or caring. Rowan Hale had built something real, and almost nobody knew it. She sat with that for a moment. The lamp, the quiet, the mountain pressing close on all sides. Then she heard a soft knock on the open study door and looked up. Rowan was standing there with a cup of coffee. He'd clearly been to sleep, and back his hair was different, less ordered, but he was up again at whatever hour this was checking. "Still at it," he said. It wasn't a question. "You should have told me it was this big," she said. He came forward and set the cup near her elbow. He looked at the notes she'd made, 3 pages, now her handwriting small and precise, and she watched his face as he read them. The slight widening of his eyes. The stillness. "You did all this tonight," he said. "It's not done," she said. "I've barely started, but—" She hesitated, and then said the honest thing because she had committed to honesty with this man, and she intended to keep it. "Rowan, this business is not failing. It's being bled. The Mercer contract alone is costing you. I'll need to run the full numbers, but conservatively, I'd say close to $4,000 over the past year and a half." The room was very quiet. "4,000, he said. "At minimum," she said. "Possibly more." He looked at her notes again. Then he pulled the chair from the corner and sat down across from her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rowan Hale looked something other than certain. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy alone for so long that he'd stopped noticing the weight, and someone had just pointed at it. "I knew it was bad," he said. "I didn't know it was that." "Now you do," Clara said. She picked up her coffee. It was strong. He'd made it the way she would have made it, which was a small thing, but she noticed. "And now we can do something about it." "We," she had said. She heard it the moment it left her mouth, the weight of that single word. The assumption in it, the fact that she had said it without thinking. Because somewhere in the past 12 hours of writing and talking and reading and figuring, she had stopped thinking of this as his problem and started thinking of it as theirs. Rowan heard it too. She could tell. He didn't comment on it. He just looked at her across the desk in the lamplight with that shuttered, careful face of his, and then he nodded once, the same way he'd nodded when she'd named her conditions that morning in Cotter Creek. The promise kind of nod. "Then we'll get started," he said. And outside, the mountain wind moved through the timber, and somewhere in the dark, 14 men were sleeping, not knowing yet what was coming. Not knowing that the woman who had arrived that afternoon was already 3 pages into unraveling a problem that had been knotting itself for 18 months already. Seeing the shape of something they couldn't yet see. Already laying the groundwork for a fight that none of them knew they were going to have to win. Clara took another sip of coffee and turned to the next ledger. She found the first discrepancy on a Tuesday. It was her 5th day at the mountain house, and she had developed a rhythm already up before Rowan Coffee made at the desk by the time the first gray light came through the window. She worked through the ledgers, in order oldest first building a picture. The way you build any picture one piece at a time, holding the whole thing in your head while your hands dealt with the parts. The discrepancy was small, easy to miss. In fact, she was almost certain it had been missed intentionally designed to be missed because it was buried inside a column of legitimate supply expenses written in a slightly different hand than the entries around it. $43. Listed as mill equipment maintenance. Dated 14 months ago. Clara circled it. Then she went back through the previous 6 months and found 3 more like it. Different amounts. Different listed purposes. Same slightly different handwriting. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she got up and went to find Rowan. He was in the yard talking to Pete Garza when she came out, and something in the way she walked made both men stop mid-sentence. "I need to speak with you," she said to Rowan. She looked at Garza briefly pleasantly. "Privately." Garza's expression flickered that wariness again, that "what is she doing" calculation running behind his eyes, but he stepped back. "I'll check on the North crew," he said, and walked away. Rowan followed Clara into the study. She closed the door behind them, something she hadn't done before, and put the open ledger on the desk in front of him, her finger on the circled entry. "Look at this," she said. He looked. His face didn't change immediately. He was a man who processed things internally. First, she'd learned that quickly, he thought, before he reacted, which was a quality she respected. But right now, she needed him to move a little faster. "And these," she said, flipping back to the marked pages. 4 entries, 4 circles. Now his face changed. Slowly, like weather moving in. "Someone's been skimming," she said. Not a question. "How much?" His voice was very flat. "In these ledgers alone, $218. She paused. "But Rowan, I've only been through the first third of what you have. If the pattern holds, how far back does it go? As far back as the ledgers I've seen. 14 months minimum." She watched his jaw tighten. "Do you know who keeps these books besides you?" The pause before he answered was 1 beat too long. "Garza handles some of the entry work," he said. "When I'm out with the crews." The room went very quiet. Clara kept her voice steady and careful. "That's not an accusation, not yet. The handwriting could be anyone's. But I need to compare it, and I need you to not say anything to anyone until I have the full picture. Can you do that?" Rowan looked at her. His eyes were dark and absolutely still, the look of a man controlling something very large inside himself with a very tight grip. "Yes," he said. "Good." She put her hand on the ledger. "I need samples of every person's handwriting who has ever touched these books. Payroll signatures, supply orders, anything. Don't ask for them in a way that raises questions. How? Tell them you're updating the employment records, that you need full names signed for a contract requirement with the railroad." She met his eyes. "Is that plausible?" He thought for a second. "Yes." "Then do it today," she said. "And Rowan," she waited until he looked at her directly, "whoever it is, we find out for certain before we do anything. I've seen men accused of things they didn't do, and it never ends clean. We do this right." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded the promise nod, the one she'd come to recognize as the most reliable thing about him. "Right," he said. He left. Clara turned back to the ledger and kept working faster now, every page carrying a new weight. By the time Rowan came back with the handwriting samples that evening, 7 men's signatures on a payroll update form he'd passed around with a completely neutral expression. Clara had found 6 more discrepancies. Total confirmed loss, $340, 14 months ongoing. She laid the signatures on the desk beside the ledger and compared them one by one. It took her 4 minutes. "It's not Garza," she said. She felt Rowan's exhale from across the room, a long, controlled release of something he'd been holding since morning. "Then who?" he said. She pointed to the 3rd signature on the sheet. "Tom Rigby." Rowan went very still. "Rigby's been with me for 2 years. I know. The entries start 2 years ago." She looked up at him. "He's careful. He's been taking just enough to not be noticed. Small amounts, plausible categories, irregular intervals, so there's no pattern to catch the eye." She paused. "If you hadn't been behind on the books, you might have caught it sooner. If you'd stayed behind on the books much longer, he'd have taken twice this much and you'd never have traced it." Rowan sat down. It was the first time she'd seen him sit down heavily, the weight of something pressing him into a chair rather than the ordinary act of sitting. "I trusted him," he said. "I know. He ate at my table." "I know," Clara said again more quietly. She gave him a moment. She didn't fill the silence with reassurance. She'd learned that Rowan didn't want reassurance. He wanted time, and time was the one thing she could actually give him for free. After a while he looked up. "What do we do?" "Tomorrow morning before work begins, you'll speak to him privately. You'll show him the evidence. I'll prepare a summary, exact amounts, exact dates, and you'll give him one option: full repayment on a structured schedule, or you send the sheriff up here to sort it." She folded her hands on the desk. "Do not give him a second option. Do not let him talk you into a second option. Men like this are very good at explaining why they deserve more grace than they've earned." Rowan looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Something past respect. Something in the neighborhood of wonder, though if she'd said so, he would have denied it. "You've dealt with this before," he said. "My father had a farmhand who did something similar when I was 17. She said. "Smaller amounts. Same approach." She paused. "We were too soft about it. He left anyway, and we never recovered the money. I learned." Rowan nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow morning. And Rowan." She stopped him as he stood. "Prepare yourself for him to have a story. Something sympathetic, sick family member debt of his own, some reason that's meant to make you feel that you're the one who did wrong by catching him. Don't let it move you. The sympathy can be real, and the theft can still be theft. Both things can be true at once." He looked at her for a long moment. "Who taught you that?" he asked. "Life?" she said simply. "Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow will be early." Tom Rigby cried. That was the thing Clara hadn't quite prepared Rowan for, though she'd warned him something like it might happen. She wasn't in the room. She'd prepared the document 2 pages precise and undeniable. And then she'd told Rowan this was his conversation to have his crew, his authority. But she heard it from the hallway, because the walls of a mountain house, however large, were not entirely soundproof. First came the silence. Then Rigby's voice, low, defensive, clipped. Then Rowan's voice, even and unhurried, the same tone he used for everything. Then a longer silence. Then the sound that Clara recognized even through a closed door as a grown man losing the battle with himself. She walked away from the door and went to the kitchen and made coffee because she needed something to do with her hands, and because she had a suspicion that when this was over, Rowan was going to need a cup in his own hands too. She was right. He came in 15 minutes later, sat at the kitchen table, and accepted the cup she set in front of him without a word. His face was composed. It was also very tired. "He has a daughter," Rowan said. 8 years old, been sick. Clara sat down across from him. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it. She was sorry genuinely for the daughter, for the impossible position, for the fact that hard circumstances so often produced impossible choices. "And the money?" "He'll pay it back. $15 a month until it's settled." Rowan looked at his coffee. "I didn't send for the sheriff." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, was he telling the truth about the daughter? Yes, I've seen her twice. His mouth tightened. Which is why he did it here. Because he knew I wouldn't. He stopped. Because he knew you were decent, Clara said carefully. That's not a flaw, Rowan. People exploit decency because decency is real. The exploiting is the problem, not the quality. He looked at her across the table, and for a second, she had the very strange sensation of being seen completely, not just the efficient, organized, practical Clara that she showed the world, but the whole architecture of her, including the parts she kept in the back rooms. You're good at this, he said. At what? At all of it. He said it without flourish, without qualification, simply the way he said every true thing. I brought you here because I needed someone to manage accounts. I didn't expect... He paused, choosing the word this. This, she repeated. Someone who thinks the way you think, he said. Who sees the whole thing at once. Who knows how to handle people without... He gestured, searching, without breaking them. Clara looked at her own coffee. She felt something warm and uncomfortable spreading through her chest, the way you feel when someone says something accurate about you that you weren't prepared to hear. My father said I was born practical, she said. My mother said I was born caring and just got very good at hiding it. She looked up. I think they were both right. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. The Mercer contract, he said after a moment. You said $4,000. Minimum. I've finished the full review now. The correct number is closer to 4,700. 4,700. He said the number the way you say a number that's physical, that lands on your chest like something dropped. Over 18 months, she said. Which means Mercer has been getting your lumber at roughly what it costs you to produce with almost no margin left for you. She folded her hands on the table. This wasn't an accident, Rowan. Mercer structured that contract deliberately. They knew what they were doing when they offered to fill that cash flow gap. You think they were watching us? I think they were watching you, she said. Watching for a moment when you'd be vulnerable enough to say yes to a bad deal. She paused. The question is what they plan to do next. Rowan looked at her steadily. Why do you think they plan to do anything next? Because a company that invests this much patience in getting someone locked into a below-market contract, Clara said, doesn't do it just to save money on lumber. They do it to destabilize, to make you dependent, to put you in a position where when they come to you with an offer to buy you out, she let the sentence land, you're too financially exhausted to say no. The silence in the kitchen was very loud. You think they want the operation, Rowan said. I think they want the land, Clara said. And they've been engineering the conditions to get it. She leaned forward slightly. How long have you owned the cutting rights on the North Ridge? He frowned. 7 years. I filed the original claim when I first came up here. And what's above the North Ridge? Rowan was quiet. She watched the calculation happen in his eyes the way a man looks when information he already has starts to arrange itself into a shape he hadn't seen before. Old Corbin Pass, he said slowly. If someone controlled the timber rights on both sides of the pass, they'd control the only viable route for rail expansion into the upper range, Clara finished. Which means anyone wanting to extend the railroad north would have to negotiate with whoever owns those rights. Rowan put his cup down very slowly. The railroad has been talking about northern expansion for 2 years, he said. I know. I read about it in 3 of the contracts in your files. She met his eyes. Mercer isn't a timber company, Rowan, not primarily. They're positioning to be a land broker for rail rights. Your timber is just the vehicle they're using to get your land. The morning light had come fully into the kitchen now, and somewhere outside the men were starting work, the familiar sounds of the operation beginning its day, and Rowan Hale sat at his kitchen table, looking at his wife of 6 days, and understanding perhaps for the first time precisely how deep the water was around him, and how fortunate it was that he'd found someone who could read currents. We need to break that contract, he said. Yes. Can we? That depends on what's in the fine print. She stood. Which is why I need the original document. The one in the box. Today. I'll find it, he said. Now, she said. He stood. He looked at her, that look again, the shudder, the held light. Clara. Yes. I owe you an apology. She stopped. For what? For not telling you more, before you agreed to come here. He held her gaze, and there was nothing evasive in him. He was direct. The way clear water is direct, you can see straight through to the bottom. I told you I needed someone capable. I didn't tell you the full scope because I was afraid. He stopped. Afraid I'd say no, she said. Afraid you'd think it was too much, he said. That the problem was too large. That I was a pause briefer, but heavier, not worth the trouble. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her chest. Something she had been keeping very carefully in the professional category of their arrangement. Something she had been deliberately not examining too closely moved without her permission. Rowan, she said. I've been in this study every morning since I arrived. I've seen what you built here by yourself in 7 years in the mountains from nothing. And I've seen every mistake and every gap and every oversight too. She paused. None of it makes me think you're not worth the trouble. All of it together makes me think you deserve someone watching your back. He looked at her for a long time. Thank you, he said, quiet, unadorned. The way he said every true thing. Get the contract, she said. We have work to do. He found it in 20 minutes, still inside the wooden box, folded inside an envelope she'd actually already noticed, but hadn't opened because it was sealed, and she'd been waiting for him to provide it. She didn't tell him that. She read it twice. Then she read specific sections 3 more times. And then she sat back in her chair, and something happened in her face that Rowan, watching from the doorway with his arms crossed, recognized as the expression of someone who has just found exactly what they needed. There's a clause, she said. Good or bad? Extraordinary. She turned the page toward him and pointed. Section 12. Renegotiation is permitted if either party experiences what's defined here as a material change in operational scale, meaning if your output increases or decreases by more than 20% over any 90-day period, either party can call for new terms. Rowan came forward and read the clause himself. They'd argue our output hasn't changed. Not yet, Clara said. She looked up at him. What would it take to increase production by 20% in the next 90 days? Rowan's eyes moved in that internal calculation way. 2 more cutters, maybe 3. Another mill hand. Better coordination on the haul schedule. Could Garza do it if we gave him clear direction and the resources? Garza could do it in 60 days if I told him it mattered. Then tell him it matters. Clara set the contract down. We increase production, trigger the clause, call Mercer to the table, and renegotiate from a position of strength instead of desperation. She paused. And when we come to that table, I need you to let me handle the conversation. Rowan looked at her. Something in his face wrestled with itself briefly. The instinct of a man who had run his own operation alone for 7 years, for whom delegation was genuinely difficult, fighting against the evidence of the past 6 days, which had been considerable. The evidence won. All right, he said. I mean it, she said. I need you present. I need your authority behind me. But the numbers, the argument, the terms, that's mine. I said, all right, Clara. I know. I'm saying it again because it matters. She held his gaze. Mercer will try to work around me. They'll direct their questions to you. They'll find ways to suggest I shouldn't be in the room. She paused. I need to know that when that happens, you won't let them. The question underneath the question was obvious. They both knew it was there. Rowan Hale looked at his wife, a woman he had chosen in a hardware store doorway, because she walked down a street like someone who had already decided not to be defeated, and he had recognized something in that, some quality he couldn't name until much later. And he said with absolute and uncomplicated certainty, they won't. Clara held that for a moment. Let it settle into her the way truth settles when you weren't sure you were going to hear it. Then she picked up the contract, turned to a clean page in her notebook, and started writing. Outside, Pete Garza was shouting something to the North crew. The sound of axes hitting timber rang through the mountain air. 14 men working a day they thought was ordinary. They had no idea what was coming. And neither, not quite yet, did Mercer Timber. But Clara Hale. Clara Whitlock, who had packed a single bag and made a desperate bet and ridden into the mountains, not knowing what waited for her, she knew. She was already 3 steps ahead, and she was just getting started. Pete Garza did it in 53 days. Clara had said 60. Rowan had said 60. Garza had said nothing at all when Rowan told him what was needed. He'd just looked at the numbers Clara had written on a single sheet of paper, folded it into his shirt pocket, and walked back out to the yard. 53 days later, he came to the study door while Clara was working and set a production summary on her desk without a word. She read it. Then she read it again. 23%, she said. 24 if you count the secondary hall from the east cut, Garza said. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, trying to look like it was nothing, and doing a poor job of it because the corner of his mouth kept threatening to move. Clara looked up at him. In the past 7 weeks, something had shifted between them, not dramatically, not with any single conversation that she could point to, but in the way of water finding its level. Garza had watched her work. He'd watched her find the Rigby discrepancy, watched her read the Mercer contract, watched her restructure the payroll schedule so the men got paid more reliably on the same day each month, without it costing the operation $1 more. He hadn't said anything about any of it. He didn't have to. She could read his respect the same way she read ledgers, in the small reliable details, not the grand statements. 23 is enough, she said. Thank you, Pete. He nodded, pushed off the doorframe, stopped. You sending for Mercer? This week. He nodded again. You want me there? At the meeting? Clara considered this. Yes, she said. But you sit behind me, and you don't speak unless I ask you to. Can you do that? Garza looked at her for a moment, with something that might have been amusement on a different face. Yes, ma'am, he said. I believe I can manage that. She wrote the letter to Mercer Timber that evening. Rowan read it over her shoulder. She could feel him standing there, that particular stillness of his, the concentrated attention he gave to things that mattered. It's formal, he said. It's meant to be. You're not telling them why you're calling for the meeting. No, she said. I'm invoking the clause. That's all they need to know until they're sitting in front of us. They'll come in defensive. Good, Clara said. Defensive people make mistakes. She turned in her chair to look up at him. Are you worried? He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was one of the things she'd come to rely on, that he never answered a question he hadn't actually considered. No, he said finally. Not about the meeting. A pause. Mercer himself won't come. He'll send someone. I'm counting on it, Clara said. A man like Mercer doesn't ride 3 days into the mountains for a renegotiation meeting unless he's already lost. He'll send a representative who has limited authority to agree to anything. Which means whatever we get them to concede in that room, Mercer will have to honor because his man signed it. Rowan looked at her. You've been thinking about this for a while, he said. Since the day I read the contract, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need from me in the room? Exactly what I asked for before, she said. Your presence, your authority, and your silence unless I look at you directly, in which case I need you to agree with whatever I've just said. Something flickered across his face. Even if I don't. If you don't agree, tell me before we go in, she said. Not during. In that room, we are one position, not 2 people with separate opinions. One position. Rowan held her gaze. Agreed, he said, and then, you know you don't have to keep asking if I'll back you. I told you I would. I know, Clara said. I keep asking because I was raised in a world where people say they'll back you right up until the moment it costs them something. And then they find a reason why they can't. She held his eyes steadily. You haven't given me a reason to think you're like that. I'm just not quite done testing yet. The honesty of it hung in the air between them. Rowan didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself or reassure her. He just looked at her with those dark, direct eyes and said, "Then keep testing. I'll keep passing." Clara turned back to the letter. She added the final line, signed her name, Clara Hale, Managing Partner, Hale Timber Operations, and set it aside to dry. It was the first time she'd written that name. Managing Partner. She'd added it herself without asking because it was accurate and because accuracy mattered. She wondered if Rowan had noticed. She found out an hour later when he came in from outside, picked up the letter to review it one more time and read that line. He didn't say anything. He just set it back down and walked to the window. And after a moment, he said very quietly to the glass, "That's right. Just that. That's right." Clara kept her eyes on her notebook and felt something warm move through her chest that she was getting increasingly bad at pretending wasn't there. Mercer's man arrived on a Thursday. His name was Gerald Holt, and he came with two things, a leather case full of documents and the particular brand of smooth confidence that belongs to men who have won many negotiations by making the other party feel smaller than they were. He was perhaps 45, well-dressed for the mountains, which itself was a kind of statement. I didn't dress for your terrain, I dressed for my authority. Clara had made coffee. She'd set out the good cups, the ones she'd found in a cabinet that had probably never been used because Rowan was not a man who thought about good cups. She'd arranged the study so that Rowan's chair was at the head of the table, her chair directly beside him, and Garza's chair slightly behind to the right. Every piece of paper she needed was stacked in front of her in exact order. When Holt walked in and saw the setup, his eyes moved across it the way a man's eyes move when he's recalculating. He'd expected, she guessed, to find a rangy mountain man across a cluttered desk. He found instead what appeared to be a prepared legal proceeding with good coffee. "Mr. Hale," Holt said, extending his hand to Rowan. "Mr. Holt," Rowan said and shook it. Holt looked at Clara with a polite, dismissive smile. The kind of smile that says, "I see you, but you don't factor into this." "And you are?" "Clara Hale," she said. "Managing partner. Please sit down." Holt sat. He opened his leather case. "Well," he said, directing himself to Rowan with the smooth ease of long practice. "I understand you've invoked the renegotiation clause. I have to say, we were a little surprised. The current terms have been quite beneficial." "To Mercer," Clara said. Holt paused, looked at her, looked back at Rowan. "As I was saying, the current terms." "Mr. Holt," Clara said, and her voice was pleasant and absolutely immovable. The voice of a woman who has run on 4 hours of sleep for 7 weeks and has nothing left to spend on social niceties. "I'm going to save us both some time. I have a full accounting of the operational impact of the current contract terms over the past 18 months. I'd like to walk you through it." She set the first document in front of him before he could respond. He looked at it. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes did a slight recalibration, like a man adjusting his footing. "This is your production output versus contracted price versus market rate," Clara said, moving her finger across the columns. "As you can see, the average market rate for comparable timber over the same period was 14% above what Mercer has been paying, not 12% as the contract stipulates. 14. The market moved, and the contract did not." "Contracts don't typically adjust for market fluctuation," Holt started. "Unless they contain a fair market review provision," Clara said. She set the second document in front of him. "Which this one does. Section 9, Paragraph 4. Quarterly review upon written request. We've made no such request in 18 months because, frankly, the clause was buried and the operational records weren't sufficiently organized to support the argument." She paused just long enough to let that land. "They are now." Holt looked at Section 9. His jaw tightened slightly. "The total adjusted value of the differential," Clara continued, placing the third document, "comes to $4,712. That is the amount by which Mercer has underpaid for delivered lumber based on the contract's own fair market provision." Holt looked up from the document. He looked at Rowan. "Mr. Hale." "Mrs. Hale is our point of contact on this matter," Rowan said. "Calm. Uncomplicated. Not a trace of hesitation. Holt's eyes moved back to Clara. Something had changed in them. The dismissiveness was gone. In its place was something more careful, more assessing. "That's a significant claim," he said. "It's a documented one," she said. "Every figure has a source. Every source is in that stack." She gestured to the pile beside her. "You're welcome to review any of them." Holt sat back. He was thinking. Clara let him think she'd learned from the Rigby situation, from her father's dealings, from years of being underestimated and having to outprepare everyone in the room, that silence after a strong position was not weakness. It was confidence. After a long moment, Holt said, "What are you proposing?" "Two things," Clara said. "First, the adjusted differential is credited against future deliveries. Not paid in cash, credited. Mercer can absorb that across the next 12 months. She paused. "That's the generous offer, Mr. Holt. We're not asking for cash because we understand operational realities." "And the second thing?" Holt asked. "New contract terms," Clara said. "Market rate reviewed quarterly, with a written request mechanism that both parties acknowledge in writing each quarter, whether a review is requested or waived. No more buried clauses." She slid the fourth document across. "I've drafted the revised terms." Holt picked up the document. He read it. Clara watched his face move through the stages. Resistance calculation, reluctant recognition that the numbers were airtight. She had spent 11 days on this document. She had rewritten it 6 times. She had read it aloud to herself at 2 a.m. in the empty study to make sure every sentence was as clear as she intended, with no room for Mercer to find the gaps she'd left in their favor. There were no gaps. "I'll need to bring this to Mr. Mercer," Holt said finally. "Of course," Clara said. "You have 30 days to respond. After 30 days, if we haven't heard, we'll be contacting the railroad directly about a supply relationship." She met his eyes. "The Northern Expansion Committee has been very receptive to preliminary conversations." The room went very still. Holt set the document down slowly. "You've spoken to the railroad." "I've opened a conversation," Clara said. Which was true. She had written one letter 2 weeks ago to a name she'd found in Rowan's railroad contract files, a procurement manager named Abel Cross. She had received a reply in 12 days that was considerably more enthusiastic than she'd expected. She had not told Rowan about this yet. She told him everything but this she'd been saving for precisely this moment. "The railroad has existing supplier relationships," Holt started, "which they're currently reviewing as part of expansion planning," Clara said. "Mr. Cross was quite specific about that." Holt looked at her. He looked at Rowan. Rowan looked back at him with the unreadable expression of a man who has decided to trust someone completely and is at peace with it. Holt closed his leather case. 30 days, he said. 30 days, Clara confirmed. He stood, shook hands with Rowan, and then after a brief hesitation extended his hand to Clara as well. She shook it. His grip was different than it had been when he arrived. More even, more real. When he'd gone, the three of them, Clara, Rowan, Garza, sat in the quiet of the study for a moment. Then Garza exhaled through his nose and said, "The railroad. You actually contacted the railroad." 2 weeks ago, Clara said. Garza looked at Rowan. "Did you know?" "No," Rowan said. He was looking at Clara with an expression she hadn't seen before. Something past admiration, something in the territory of astonishment, though on his face, it was quiet, the way everything on his face was quiet. "Were you going to tell me?" he asked. "I'm telling you now," Clara said. "I didn't want it in your face before the meeting. You would have worried about whether it was the right move, and I needed you relaxed." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Was it the right move?" "Holt left without arguing about the credit," she said. "You tell me." Garza made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh. He stood up, put his hat on, and headed for the door. "I'm going back to the crew," he said. He paused in the doorway and looked back at Clara. "Mrs. Hale." "Yes, I was wrong about you," he said, "when you first got here." He said it plainly the way Rowan said plain things, and she realized that perhaps working for Rowan for 2 years had given Garza some of the same habits. "I know," she said. "You came around." He nodded once and left. Clara started gathering her documents. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady the entire meeting, which she was privately proud of because her heart had not been steady at all. "You're shaking," Rowan said. She looked up. Her hands were perfectly still. "No, I'm not," she said. "Inside," he said quietly. "You have been for the past hour. I can see it." She put the papers down. She looked at him. She thought about denying it. She was very good at denying things she'd had decades of practice. And then she thought about the promise she'd made in this very room about honesty. It was a risk, she said. The railroad contact. If Holt had called it, if he'd known how early we were in that conversation, it would have deflated the whole argument. But he didn't. "No." "Because you read him right," Rowan said. "Before he walked in, you knew he'd be more afraid of losing the railroad angle than of any contract clause." "I thought he would be," she corrected. "There's a difference." Rowan stood up. He came around the table, not quickly, not dramatically, just with the deliberate, unhurried movement that was characteristic of him in everything, and he stopped on the same side of the table as her and looked at her directly. "Clara," he said. "Yes, what you just did in that room." He paused, and she could see him choosing the words with his usual care. "I have been in this business for 7 years. I have sat across from buyers and contractors and men who thought they could take what I'd built because I was alone up here and didn't have the right language for the fight." His jaw tightened slightly. "I have always managed, but I have never not once walked out of a negotiation feeling like that." "Like what?" she asked. "Like the other man left smaller than he arrived," Rowan said. "And we left larger." Clara looked at him. The afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in that study, and she was aware of how close he was standing. She had catalogued the distance between them in the way you catalog things you're trying not to think about, and she said because it was true, and because she had committed to truth, we. That's the word that mattered today. Not me. We. Something broke open in Rowan Hale's face. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, finally releasing. His hand came up and touched her face, just his thumb along her jaw, the most careful thing she had ever felt, and he said very quietly, "I know I didn't give you much reason to trust this arrangement, at the beginning." "You gave me the bank receipt," she said. "That was a start." His mouth moved. The real smile, the one she'd only seen once before, crooked and brief and entirely transforming. "That was a start," he agreed. She covered his hand with hers. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Rowan's expression shifted, something coming into it, something she hadn't seen before and couldn't immediately name. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. Clara went still. "Tell me now." He lowered his hand. He moved to the desk and opened the bottom drawer, a drawer she hadn't been through, which was unusual because she had been through most things in this study by now. He pulled out a folded document and held it out to her. She took it, unfolded it. It was a survey document, land survey, dated 3 years ago, covering an area that she recognized from the maps she'd studied, the North Ridge, the Corbin Pass area, the high ground above Rowan's current cutting operation. But the survey was more extensive than she'd realized, much more extensive. She looked up. "This is 4 times the size of your current operation." "Yes." "You own all of this." "I have the filing rights," he said. "I've never told anyone the full extent of it. Not Garza, not the railroad, not Mercer." He paused. "Not you. Until now." Clara looked at the survey again. She did the arithmetic in her head. The timber value, the land value, the rail rights implications, and the number she arrived at was large enough that she had to do it twice to believe it. "Rowan," she said carefully, "do you understand what this means for the railroad negotiation?" "I think so," he said. But I want you to tell me. It means we're not asking the railroad for a supply contract, she said. We're offering them the only viable northern route they can build without going around us, which they can't do without adding 60 miles to the line. She looked at him. We're not a supplier, we're a partner, a necessary one. Rowan held her gaze. I've known that for 3 years, he said. I didn't know how to use it. Why are you telling me now? She asked. Why not before the meeting with Holt? This would have... Because before the meeting with Holt I wasn't certain, he said. Certain of what? He looked at her steadily. That you'd stay. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Clara stared at him. What? The arrangement we made, he said, was a business arrangement. You came here because of a debt, because of your father, because you had no other option. He held her gaze without flinching. I didn't know, I still don't know for certain whether this is a place you chose or a place you ended up. And I wasn't going to put the full weight of everything I have into your hands until I knew which one it was. Clara was silent for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the timber. Somewhere, a man shouted something to another man, ordinary and distant. The operation going on as it always went on, the world not stopping for the still center of this room. Rowan, she said. I have reorganized your accounts, identified your thief, renegotiated your primary contract, and opened a relationship with the railroad that may be worth more than everything else combined. She paused. Does that sound like a woman who is waiting for a chance to leave? He looked at her. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. Then show me the rest of the survey, she said. All of it, everything you haven't told anyone. She set the document on the desk between them and smoothed it flat with both hands. And let's figure out what we're actually worth. Rowan sat down across from her. He leaned forward. And for the first time since she had arrived in his mountains, Rowan Hale opened the door he'd been keeping closed the longest. Not the wooden door of the study, not the iron gate of the operation, but the internal one. The one that held the full measure of what he had built and dreamed and protected in 7 years of solitude, and he let her in. They worked until midnight, and when they finally stopped, the survey covered in Clara's precise notations, 2 pages of strategy written in her small, careful hand, a letter to Abel Cross at the railroad half-drafted beside it, when they finally stopped and the lamp was burning low, and the mountain outside was deeply, absolutely quiet. Rowan looked at her across the desk and said, I didn't know when I asked you to marry me that it would turn into this. Into what? She said. He looked at everything on the desk between them. Then at her. Something real, he said. Clara held that for a moment, felt the truth of it settle into her, not the warm, rushing feeling, not the thing she'd been managing and filing away, but something deeper and quieter and far more permanent. Neither did I, she said honestly. Outside, the kettle range held its ancient silence. Inside, the lamp burned, and 2 people who had come together out of desperation sat across a desk covered in the evidence of something neither of them had planned, and both of them for the first time allowed themselves to believe it might be permanent. End of Part 4. Mercer's response came on the 28th day. Not a letter. A man. A different man this time, not Holt, but someone older, heavier, with the kind of face that has spent decades making decisions that cost other people things. He rode up alone, which surprised Clara, and he asked for her by name, which surprised her more. Mrs. Hale, he said when she came to the door. I'm Douglas Mercer. Clara did not let her face show what she felt, which was a sudden, sharp recalibration of everything she thought she knew about how this would go. Mercer himself. Not his representative, not a letter. The man. Mr. Mercer, she said. Come in. She put him in the study. She went to find Rowan, who was in the yard with Garza, and she said quietly into his ear. Mercer came himself. Rowan turned to look at her. That's not what we expected. No, she said. Which means either he's angry enough to come personally, or the railroad conversation moved faster than we thought. She paused. Either way, we're ready. Are you? He looked at her steadily. Are you? I've been ready since day one, she said. They walked in together. Douglas Mercer was a man who filled a room not with noise, not with performance, but with the particular gravity of someone who has been the most powerful person in most rooms for most of his life, and has stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. He looked at Clara and Rowan without the polite dismissiveness Holt had used. He looked at them the way a man looks when he is genuinely assessing a threat. That, Clara thought, was actually a good sign. I'll skip the pleasantries, Mercer said, because I think you'll appreciate that more than I would. We would, Clara said. She sat down. Rowan sat beside her. Neither of them offered Mercer a coffee. That was deliberate. You contacted Abel Cross, Mercer said. Yes. Cross has been in conversation with my company for 14 months about the northern expansion rights. I know, Clara said. I read your name in 3 of our contract files from the past 2 years. You've been positioning for the rail rights since before you approached my husband with the original supply agreement. Mercer looked at her. A long, flat look. Then he said, You're smarter than Holt told me. Holt told you I was smart? Clara said. He said you were dangerous, Mercer said. Which in my experience means the same thing. Rowan said nothing. Clara felt the warmth of him beside her solid present unshifting, and it gave her the same thing it always gave her, which was not comfort exactly, but something better, certainty. What did you come to offer? She asked. Mercer opened the case he'd brought and slid a document across the desk. Clara picked it up, read it, kept her face neutral, which required effort because the number on the front page was substantial, a buyout offer for the timber rights on the North Ridge. Not the full operation, just the ridge. The part that controlled Corbin Pass. That's a generous number, she said. It's a fair number, Mercer said. It's a fair number for the timber rights, Clara said. It's not a fair number for what the timber rights represent. She set the document back down. Mr. Mercer, I have correspondence from Abel Cross in writing indicating that the railroad's Northern Expansion Committee has identified our land position as, and I'm quoting directly, operationally essential for any viable northern route. That makes our position worth considerably more than timber. Mercer's jaw tightened. Cross had no authority to put that in writing. And yet he did, Clara said pleasantly. People sometimes say true things without being authorized to. A silence. Heavy loaded, the kind of silence that in a different kind of meeting would precede a threat. Clara held it without filling it. What do you want? Mercer said. We want a partnership, Clara said. Not a buyout, not a contract. A partnership with a seat at the table on the rail rights negotiation. Equity position, not flat fee. The railroad pays over time as the route produces. We participate in that production, not just receive a one-time payment and walk away. Mercer stared at her. You're asking for a stake in the railroad expansion. We're offering the only land position that makes the expansion viable, Clara said. What we're asking for is proportional to what we're providing. You'd be negotiating against companies that have been in this business for 30 years, Mercer said. It wasn't quite a threat. It was something more honest, a warning from a man who had just moved from adversary to something more complicated. I've been managing this operation for less than 3 months, Clara said. And we're sitting here with a documented claim worth 4 times what you initially thought you were buying. She met his eyes. I'm not concerned about experience, Mr. Mercer. I'm concerned about position. And our position is strong. Mercer looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Rowan. Your wife, he said, is either going to make you very rich or get you into a great deal of trouble. Both, probably, Rowan said. It was the first thing he'd said since they sat down, and he said it with the quiet certainty of a man who has looked at the future and made his peace with it. Mercer almost smiled. I need 2 weeks, he said. You have 10 days, Clara said. After that we go to Cross directly. Mercer stood. He picked up his case. He looked at Clara one more time, not with the calculating assessment of earlier, but with something she recognized from the look Garza had given her in the doorway weeks ago. The look of a person updating their understanding of the world. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "Mr. Mercer," she said. He left. The sound of his horse moving away from the house faded into the mountain quiet. And then there was silence, real silence, the kind that comes after something significant when the air is still settling. Garza, who had been standing in the hallway again, appeared in the doorway. "A partnership stake," he said. "In the railroad expansion." "Yes," Clara said. "Is that actually going to happen?" "Yes," she said. "I believe it is." Garza looked at Rowan. Rowan looked back at him with his characteristic calm. Garza shook his head slowly, the way a man shakes his head at something that exceeds his framework for predicting outcomes, and went back down the hall without another word. Rowan turned to Clara. 10 days, he said. "He'll be back in 8, she said. "Men like Mercer can't hold a position for 10 days once they've already decided to move." "And if he doesn't move, then we go to Cross," she said. "But he will." She started gathering her papers. "Rowan?" "Yes." She stopped. She set the papers down. She turned to face him fully, not the businesslike turn, not the "I have a point to make" turn, but the full, unguarded, complete turn of a person who has decided to stop managing something. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "When I came here," she said, "I told myself it was practical, that I was making a rational decision, that I was trading one set of circumstances for a more viable set of circumstances." She held his gaze. "I told myself that for about 3 weeks." "And after 3 weeks," he said quietly. "After 3 weeks I stopped believing it," she said. "Because practical decisions don't make you care whether someone is sleeping enough. Practical decisions don't make you learn how someone takes their coffee without asking. Practical decisions." Her voice caught slightly, and she pushed through it the way she always pushed through the things that threatened to undo her. "Don't make you feel like the best version of yourself has been waiting for the right kind of room to breathe in." Rowan stood very still. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At saying it. I'm good at accounts and contracts and finding the clause buried in Section 12. I am not good at—" She gestured slightly helplessly. "This." "You're doing fine," Rowan said. His voice was low and very careful, the way he handled everything he didn't want to break. "I love this place," she said. "I love the work. I love—" She stopped, looked at him, said the true thing, the whole true thing, because she had promised honesty, and she intended to keep every promise she ever made. "I love you. I think I have for a while. I just needed to be certain before I said it out loud." The room was very quiet. Rowan Hale crossed the distance between them in 2 steps. He took her face in both hands, those large, careful, work-hardened hands, and he looked at her for a moment with the shuttered window completely open, all the held light finally coming through, and she saw in his face everything he hadn't said in 3 months, the watching, the learning, the held-back warmth, the private astonishment of a man who had built a life alone in the mountains and had stopped believing that anyone would ever really see it. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "I have been in love with you," he said, "since the morning you were standing at the stable before I arrived, with your bag at your feet, and that look on your face." She almost laughed. "That look!" "Like you'd already decided," he said. "Like the world could push as hard as it wanted, and you were not going to move." His thumbs moved along her jaw, gentle and certain. "I've never wanted to be on the same side as someone as much as I wanted to be on yours." Clara covered his hands with hers. She had done this once before, weeks ago, in this same room, and it had felt tentative. It did not feel tentative now. "You are," she said. "You have been." He kissed her. She kissed him back, and the mountain around them held its great ancient quiet, the same quiet it had held for 7 years, while a man built something real and alone, and now held differently, the way a house holds quiet differently when it is finally actually full. Mercer came back in 7 days. Clara didn't say "I told you so." She didn't need to. Rowan's expression when he saw the rider coming up the trail said it for both of them, and the slight warmth in his eyes when he looked at her said the rest. The negotiation took 4 days. Clara ran it. Rowan sat beside her every hour of every session, present and authoritative and exactly what she'd asked him to be. And on the afternoon of the 4th day, when Mercer's lawyer tried to narrow the equity percentage from 12 down to 8, with an argument that was technically sound but strategically transparent, Rowan leaned forward for the first time and said in the quiet, absolute voice of a man who has decided the limit has been reached, "No." Just that, one word. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence. 12%, Rowan said. "That's our position. We've held it for 4 days. We'll hold it for 4 more if we need to." The lawyer looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him with steady, patient eyes. 12, Mercer said, and that was that. They signed on a Friday evening. Clara's hand was perfectly steady. She signed Clara Hale with her small, precise signature, and beside her, Rowan signed Rowan Hale in the larger, less practiced hand of a man who usually used his hands for different work, and across from them, Douglas Mercer signed his own name with the expression of a man who has lost something and gained something and isn't entirely unhappy with the trade. When Mercer's party had gone and the study was quiet again, Clara sat for a moment with the signed copy in front of her. Garza came in, picked it up, read the key terms, set it down. He looked at Clara. He looked at Rowan. 12% equity in a railroad expansion, he said, from a debt on a farm in Cotter Creek. 3 months, Clara said. Garza shook his head. He pulled a flask from his coat. She'd never seen him do that before, and set it on the desk between them. "I don't usually drink in the house," he said, "but I think this qualifies." Rowan picked up the flask. He took a drink and passed it to Clara. She took a drink. It burned, and she didn't make a face because she'd never given anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flinch at small things, and she passed it back to Garza, who took a drink and tucked it back in his coat and said, "Right, I'll tell the men," and walked out. Clara listened to his boots on the floorboards out the door into the yard. Heard the moment the news hit the crew, a rise in voices, someone shouting something that sounded celebratory, a brief and genuine sound of men who have worked hard and are being told it meant something. Rowan was listening too. She could see it on his face, something private and powerful moving through him, the feeling of a man who has spent 7 years building alone and has just heard the proof that it mattered. "They're happy," Clara said. "They should be," Rowan said. "They did the work." "So did you," she said. "For 7 years, before any of them got here." He looked at her. "So did you," he said, "for 3 months that covered 7 years." She shook her head. "I just organized what was already there." Clara. He said her name the same way he always said it, carefully, like it mattered, like it was a word worth treating with care. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make it smaller than it was," he said. "I know why you do it. You've spent your whole life in rooms where people didn't want to account for what you contributed. So you learned to make it smaller before they could." He held her gaze. "You don't have to do that here. I will account for it. Every time." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said softly. "All right," he agreed. 2 weeks later, a letter came from Cotter Creek. It was from Margaret Pruitt, who ran the post alongside her husband and who had known the Whitlock family for 20 years. Clara's hands were steady when she opened it, and unsteady for the 30 seconds it took her to read the first paragraph. Her father had passed. Quietly on a Sunday morning in his own bed. Margaret wrote that he had seemed peaceful in his final weeks, that the worry had gone out of his face, that he'd spoken of Clara often, that on his last coherent day he had told Margaret she chose brave. "I knew she would." Clara sat with the letter for a long time in the study. Alone, the door opened to the sound of the mountain. She didn't cry immediately. She rarely did immediately. But she let herself feel the full weight of it without pushing it away, which was its own kind of grief work, the kind she'd learned to do the hard way. Rowan found her there 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders touched, and he stayed. That was all. He just stayed. After a while, she said, "He knew, at the end, that it was all right." "Yes," Rowan said. He said, she had to stop. Start again. He said there are moments when you don't choose the safe path. You choose the brave one and pray they're the same road. "Were they?" Rowan asked. Clara looked at the letter. At the desk covered in documents that represented something she and Rowan had built together in 3 months from the wreckage of 18 months of disorder. At the window where the mountain light was doing what it always did in the afternoon. "Yes," she said. They were exactly the same road. Rowan put his arm around her. She leaned into him, not the way she leaned over a ledger, not the way she leaned into a difficult argument, but completely the way you lean into something you have decided to trust with your whole weight. They sat like that for a while. Then Clara straightened. She folded the letter carefully and put it in the tin box she kept in the desk drawer, the small account book from her old bedroom, the bank receipt from Fitch's office, and now this. The documents of a life that had turned at a hinge point and gone somewhere she hadn't planned and couldn't have imagined. "I want to go back," she said, "to Cotter Creek, to settle his things, and to see the farm." "We'll go," Rowan said. "Together." "Yes." She looked at him. "The men will be here. Garza can manage." "I know he can," Rowan said. "I'm not staying because of the men. I'm going because you shouldn't have to do that alone." He said it simply, without decoration, the way he always said the truest things. Clara nodded. She put her hand over his on the desk. He turned his hand and held hers. "Rowan," she said. "Yes. When we get back—" She paused, the thought forming clearly in her mind. "I want to expand the study. I need more wall space for the maps. The survey documents are already covering the floor." He made a sound low, warm, the sound of a man who has just received unexpected good news in a quiet form. "That's what you want to do when we get back." "Among other things," she said. "What other things?" She looked at him directly. "I want a right to cross at the railroad and begin the formal partnership conversation. I want to hire 2 more men for the accounts work because I cannot keep doing it alone, and also manage the new contracts. And—" She paused, and something in her face shifted, softer, less organized, more Clara behind the competence. "I want to learn the mountain, the parts you know, the high cuts and the passes and the places you went when you needed to think." She met his eyes. "I've been here 3 months, and I know every document in this house. I don't know the place the way you know it." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were very warm, very dark, and completely open in the way they rarely were, and that she had come to understand as the thing she valued most, not the competence, not the reliability, not even the steadiness, but this, the willingness of a closed man to be open specifically to her. "I'll show you everything," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I asked." They rode to Cotter Creek the following week. Clara handled her father's affairs with her characteristic precision. The farm sold to a young couple from the east, who looked at the land the way Clara herself had looked at it, like it was worth the work it would cost them. She thought her father would have approved. She stood in the yard one last time, while Rowan waited with the horses at the gate. The morning was clear, and the wind was from the west, and she could smell the particular smell of that particular ground, the smell of every early morning and late night and hard season she had ever lived through. She stood with it for a moment. Let it be what it was, real and past and hers. Then she turned and walked to Rowan, and he helped her up without being asked, and they rode north back toward the mountains, back toward the house with too many documents and not enough wall space, and 14 men who had learned in 3 months to adjust their understanding of who ran what. Somewhere on the long ride back, Garza's voice from a week ago came back to her from a debt on a farm in Cotter Creek. 3 months ago, she had stood in the dust of that farm with $27 and a notice of debt, and the quiet, terrible knowledge that hard work was not always enough, that the world didn't always give you what you earned, that the gap between deserving and receiving could swallow a life whole. She had been right about that. The world was not fair. But the world also had, on occasion, the grace to put a stranger in a hardware store doorway with an audacious offer and direct eyes and a mountain full of something real, waiting for someone capable enough to see it and brave enough to say yes. Clara Hale, who had packed a single bag and married a man who seemed poor, and ridden into the mountains, not knowing what waited, looked at her husband riding beside her in the afternoon light, and felt the particular unshakable peace of a woman who has taken the full measure of her life and found it against all expectation more than enough. She had chosen Brave, and Brave had brought her home. He did, yeah.